The area north of Oxford has changed dramatically in recent years. Sleepy pastures that have remained undisturbed through centuries have given way to traffic roundabouts and new motorway-style roads to meet the demands of the 20th century. Immediately beneath this roundabout, there is a railway line that has had the right-of-way since 1850. This once carried trains between Oxford and Cambridge. Now the passenger service goes no further than Bicester, a mere 12 miles compared with 77. This diesel multiple unit is approaching Oxford to call there before going on to its eventual destination of Reading. There is no shortage of activity in modern-day Oxford Station, but how many will easily recall the station that once stood alongside, from which trains ran to Cambridge? Remarkably, the original terminus buildings have survived, now used by tyre services and freshly painted in blue and white. It retains some air of distinction from that high point of the Victorian age, which is not obvious to the many that pass it by daily. Not only was it the first to be built on this site, but it also represented another large and proud railway company at Oxford, the London and North Western Railway, whose headquarters were at Euston compared to the Great Western Railway at Paddington. Its timber and cast iron contrasts with the present Oxford station, which has undergone 4 rebuilds since the first on the site in 1852. The road alongside recalls the use of the site long before the age of railways, where the Cistercian order of monks worshipped in the ancient Rewley Abbey. Another point of interest regarding this station is its close association with the Great Exhibition of 1851. Both opened in the same year. Trains ran from here to the exhibition. But there was more to it than that. The contractor responsible for the erection of both buildings was Sir Charles Fox, of Fox, Henderson and Company. The exhibition building of glass and iron was dismantled at Hyde Park and re-erected at Sydenham in 1853. It was a brilliant innovation in modular construction. The castings at Oxford of arches, beams and columns are identical with the exhibition building, though Oxford Station remained on its original site. The interior of the station, that was once filled with the steamy vapours of the shiny black engines of the LNWR, with their dark red and white coaches, expresses a certain spaciousness. Additional shuttering added during the blackout restrictions of wartime, must have created a forbidding gloom in the very long enclosed train shed. Nevertheless, there is a hint of the long galleries and free spaces of the exhibition building itself. On this, the earliest known photograph of the building in the 1870s shows the original roof at Oxford, which is of the ridge and furrow style, identical with the Crystal Palace, which was the name given to the exhibition building. Incidentally, the booking office in the centre of the photograph was also brought from the exhibition when it closed. But what remains at the back of the building, showing the original framework, reveals a design difference. Sir Joseph Paxton, who designed the exhibition building, did so using a wedge fixing device that he patented. This facilitated speed of erection and dismantling. At Oxford, this device is replaced with 2 securing bolts. This may have been to get round the patent, or simply an alteration because Oxford Station was intended to be permanent. Few people give the building a second glance, unless they wish to buy tyres. Others may notice that it is curiously different. Whatever may be its future, if it has one, it does represent a style born out of the optimism of the mid-Victorian age, a small offspring that has by many years survived its parent, as the Crystal Palace burned down in 1936, and all trace seems to have disappeared. This elevated view, taken of the station during the war, from the top of what was once the home of Cooper's Oxford Marmalade opposite, shows the station under LMS ownership. The glazing of the roof has been blacked out, which must have had an oppressive effect on the interior. The expansive coal yard on the right gives a good representation of just how essential this station was for coal deliveries in an age that was very dependent on coal, particularly for domestic use. In marked contrast is the dereliction of the 1990s. Much of the ground behind the station has been turned into a car park. The passenger trains that ran from this spot were rerouted from the ex-Great Western Station in 1951. Coal finally left the site in 1990. The area of the coal yard has now been completely cleared and awaits development. Another notable feature of the station is the means by which the trains arrived. As the name of Oxford implies, it is a city of rivers and watercourses, and both stations are situated between the Thames, or in the city of Oxford, the Isis, which is west of the stations, and the Oxford Canal, which is situated immediately east. It is not surprising that a waterway link was cut between them in 1796, which came to be known as the Sheep Wash Channel. To cross the channel was a problem for the railways. The GWR's method was really solved for them when they extended north from south of the river in 1852, elevating their line. Western resolved the problem with this swing bridge. 73 feet long and weighing 86 tons, and pivoted from the opposite bank of the channel. It still retains two tracks that now have no purpose at all, but still held by some extremely durable cast rail chairs. At the high point of its use, around the turn of the century, it was opened about 6 times in every 24 hours. This manoeuvre virtually paralysing all movement in the station, as all signals went to danger and all points were locked. The signal boxes at the station and along the line north of Oxford ensured that all trains were kept out of the area. The locomotive steam shed was close to the bridge, and LNWR sawtooth roof pattern. All trace of this has long since vanished. Remaining just beyond the bridge are the rails of a siding connection between the rival stations, a deferential link that was not improved upon until the essential needs of wartime, when a proper double-track junction was installed a little north of this point in November 1940. When the line to Bletchley was reduced to single track in 1973, the junction was moved again, a mile north of this point. sounds of the ex-Great Western Railway locomotive Burton Agnes Hall entering Oxford to take a special train to Didcot on a winter's evening recalls scenes that had once been so familiar as to be beyond mention. Amongst changes likely to occur involving this view looking from the swing bridge towards the former railway station are plans to develop the site and bring to a final conclusion its association with the railway. As previously mentioned, the wartime junction enabled much more easily the newly formed British Railways to run the Oxford to Cambridge service from the north end bays of the GWR station. That was still in the age of steam. Subsequent rebuilds of the station and the development of diesel motive power saw the end of the Cambridge service in December 1967. Although freight trains still ran between Oxford and Bletchley, and the section between Bletchley and Bedford remained precariously in full service. The steam locomotive is standing in the bay used by Cambridge trains. The bay was removed in the rebuild of 1970. However, the opposite side of the same platform in the present Oxford station still caters for trains going along the Cambridge route, as far as Bicester. Passenger trains came back to the line on the 9th of May, 1987. We begin a journey with one of these trains along the line to see how the situation compares with the past. just over a mile, the route is, in effect, on the former Great Western Main Line to Birmingham. A Class 33 with some oil tank wagons passes us from the Oxford of 1981. After turning onto the branch, there is a short distance before the railway crosses the Oxford Canal. A sharp rise in the ground level brings Wolvercote Tunnel, the only tunnel on the entire route. Since the end of steam and reduced to single track, the line has become very enclosed at Wolvercote. It brings a sense of isolation, as if it was a railway conceded to by the encroaching woodland. At this point, it is worth taking a view of the route on a map drawn by the LNWR. The short branch off a branch close to this point is a connection that once existed with the line to Worcester. 1.5 miles long, it joined the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway at Yarnton and gave that company its first access to London via Bletchley. The passenger service ceased in 1861, although freight, mainly coal and ore, were using it 100 years later, when even diesels went along it. It closed in the mid-60s. All that remains of what had been a very contentious line in its day is this short section built to cross over the Oxford Canal. With a certain degree of impudence, it also crossed over the Great Western a company that it reneged on to use this link to join a rival. All trace of its connection with the Oxbridge route has now gone. The train passes the place where it existed, with a signal box and level crossing, and for a few years, early this century, a small timber station. The area is now without feature, except for the network of roads and the dominating bulk of the wartime grain silo, its austere appearance representing a bleak necessity. Across streams and the River Ray until reaching the new Islip station, opened on the 13th of May, 1989. This is neatly built in the park and ride style of British Rail, although the garish red is at odds with the thatch and limestone of the village, suggesting urbanisation rather than rustic solitude, as did the original structure, demolished in the early 70s. The wartime fuel depot siding remains, but appears little used. The past prevails in this part of Oxfordshire. The village signpost names places surrounding the ancient site of Otmore. The contemplative settlements of Charlton and Oddington retain their distant echo with the Middle Ages, a time long before railways. The train moves quietly, almost apologetically, by this contentious land, for fear it should awaken its traditional resentments. Just over a mile before Bicester station itself is the siding for Bicester Central Ordnance Depot. This leads into the network of the Army Railway. The installation at Graven Hill and Arncote was built and brought into use in 1942, probably part of the build-up preceding the invasion into France. The camp had its own railway system of some 40-odd miles, with various stations and halts and signals. The signal box seen here was at the entrance, Bicester number 2, an LMS wartime box. It was replaced by a ground frame in the 1970s and was finally demolished in 1985. This train is the Camp Shuttle at Bicester Station in the 1950s, hauled by one of the BMR engines, a Hunslet Austerity 060. With the intensity of road usage after the war, the steam engines were replaced with a fleet of Andrew Barclay 060s in 1965. There is still a regular weekday trip goods train to and from the camp, a bit reminiscent of the days of the branch line pick-up goods, when a steam-hauled local goods train would stop at stations along the route and deliver and collect local merchandise. At the present time, it is a working for Class 37 diesels. After completing its exchange of rolling stock, the train returns to Oxford. Bicester Station in the early 60s. Built in the local limestone, it expressed more character than its rival station of the Great Western, built 60 years later. "30 years after that photograph, the station is very much reduced in stature. However, it was smartly refurbished for the reopening for the Oxford trains on the 11th of May 1987, and happily continues in its role of a terminus, with the new 165 turbo trains due to be fully operating the service by May 1993. The line beyond is not so fortunate. Goods only, with the occasional excursion specials. The present train service to Oxford has an interesting parallel with the golden years of rail travel. On the 9th of October 1905, the LNWR introduced this new vehicle, a steam rail motor, to operate the service with intermediate timber halts. The gradual decline of railways since that time is well known. The Oxford to Bicester was single-tracked in 1973, whilst the LMWR Type 4 signal box was demolished in 1989. A mile further east of the station, the line is crossed over by the 1910 cut-off line of the Great Western. Bicester North, once 4-track, a main line between Princess Risborough and Hainault Junction, shortening the Great Western's route between London and Birmingham. The essence of its greatest days returned when the route was designated for steam on British Rail, and the Chilterns resounded once again to those long familiar echoes. Country stations and signal boxes have a special affection in the appreciation of railways serving remote places that are not so remote anymore, now that most people own a car. Launton Station was only just over a mile from Bicester Station and a half-mile from the village, at the crossing between Blackthorn and Stratton Audley. It only had one siding, but it had a station house, booking office, weighbridge hut, lamp hut, and another hut for storing small merchandise. Of all these buildings, only the crossing keeper's house remains, and a crumbling platform that dates back to the early age of the 1850s, when the line was built. The station master lived in the considerable house adjoining the station, with the assistant and crossing keeper on the other side of the line. There is little to disturb Launton now, the occasional diesel-hauled freight. But to the many families of railmen that served here, it was a home as well. After the LNWR took over full control of the line in 1879, they opened on the 2nd of August 1880 the last station on the line, Marsh Gibbon. Although the station has now gone, the local coal merchant still uses the yard, and the house, built by the LNWR, is still in use. Claydon, site of the former station for Claydon House, home of the Verney family, who promoted the Buckinghamshire Railway and other railways in the county. A Class 31 approaches with a Saturdays only fertiliser train from Egerman Street on the former Great Central Line, on its way to Bletchley. It is particularly sad to lose such attractive stations as Claydon was. Its decorative style marks it out as being rather special. Possibly the famous Florence Nightingale used the station at some time, as she lived many years at Claydon House. It is all past. The place where the goods yard siding stood is marked by the surviving loading gauge, standing in the undergrowth. Near Claydon is the wartime connection put in with the former Great Central Main Line route, still frequently used. This is much more than can be said for the Great Central route itself, north of here, that passed over the Oxford and Bletchley on a bridge, which has now gone. A remote but busy country junction, Verney Junction, with its branches to Banbury and Aylesbury. The Banbury branch closed in 1966, whilst the line to Aylesbury closed as early as 1936 for passengers. The small hamlet established by the railway still remains, with a cluster of houses round an angle of some roads and a small village green. And the Verney family are still remembered by the little hostelry with the Verney arms still sported outside, where carriages to London were once stored at the back, and the gentry came here to and fro daily on their use of the railway. Those gilded Edwardian days of Pullman trains to London seem difficult to recall now in what remains of the Verney Junction of the 1990s. But at least the station master's house is still in residential use, with its bright red letterbox and white gables with a 1870 set in the little tablet in the V of the porch, and the charming surrounds of the garden that once echoed to the sound of nearby steam trains. Verney Junction of today isn't entirely without trains. This diesel multiple unit on the way to Swindon and Bristol. Winslow holds special prominence on the line. Before Verney Junction opened in 1868, it was the place where trains for Oxford and Banbury joined and divided, rather than Bletchley, which was little more than Winslow in size. The style of the building is very similar to Bicester, but in brick rather than stone. The station's apparent slow decline expresses a melancholy reflection of the busy times it must have known, when most people in the town would use it to a greater or lesser degree. A place of meetings, anticipations, and familiar recognition for a traveller's return. Dennis Comerford, signalman from 1936 until closure.
Well, I worked that job for a bit, but I did have a job as a ring signalman at one time.
You went all up and knew every station there?
I had over 40 boxes. Now let me see, right from Cambridge to Bletchley, Bletchley to Oxford, and Verney Junction to Banbury. I worked the boxes, and one or two on the main line. Well, there wasn't the train. There wasn't the traffic or nothing, and it just died. They had Carlisle, was another one they were going to do at Carlisle, they said, just the same, but...
The people of Winslow have also expressed popular support for the return of the railway, as this special, organised by the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Rail Action Group, calling to collect people for a day out at Spalding, confirms. Swanbourne is the last station before Bletchley. It provides a fine climax to the country stations along the line. For this station is almost completely intact and still serves partly as a dwelling. As far as can be ascertained, the building is contemporary with the opening of this part of the line in 1850. Its first name of Mersley appearing on the company prospectus. An attractive compilation of brick, tile and timber, weathering with early colours of British railways. Perfect and remote, it has never been over-enthusiastically restored, which makes it historically fascinating. Men working on the line on a Sunday has always been necessary, although there is no longer the need for a small army of men wielding picks and shovels. The engineer's train, now diesel-hauled by a Class 47, depicts a very compact rail-lifting unit compared to the handling of former days. Between Swanbourne and Bletchley is the summit of the line. A gradual ascent from just after Verney Junction reaches its climax before dropping down to Bletchley. A considerable obstacle in steam days when goods trains needed banking assistance, but indifferently regarded by diesels. The first Bletchley station opened on the 22nd of June 1839 on the then 10-month-old London and Birmingham Railway. It had no sidings and, according to plans, looked something like Launton. The original Platform 1 and Platform 2 for Oxford trains is now completely obliterated. Existing Oxford line traffic uses the concrete flyover built in 1963. In 1905, Alfred Paget of the LNWR Lady of the Lake class stands at one of these platforms for Oxford with a similarly elegant train. With the 1960s electrification, the imposing roof cover built by the LNWR in the 1880s was removed. The flyover that now presents such a prominent feature across the station and town was intended as a diversion for freight concentration, with a huge marshalling yard at Swanbourne. No regrets at Swanbourne, but this yard was never built. The flyover has therefore been used with a modesty disproportionate to its bulk. Although a clear definition of the role of the country's railways is not easy to comprehend, it is gratifying to see the line continue with the latest traction profile of British Rail, the 165 Turbo. As this part of the line is in full use, there must be continuing grounds for optimism that the remainder may once again fulfil the purpose of the Buckinghamshire Railway and connect Oxford with the line from Euston to the north, and of course the town of Bedford.